Forgot. If that's okay with everybody, I'm going to record this.
All right. So I always say to my clients, as a way of putting their own life experience in a bigger context, the state of the world gives me job security, and I would like nothing more than to retire. So I am part of the International Climate Psychology Alliance, which is pretty much began in the UK. And I was telling Lynn, I've been going to a lot of meetings in London lately. So I'm waking up at, in the middle of the night to do that. And I'm sort of discombobulated by that too. But, and I did my training for the Climate Reality Project in April, right when wait, is that right? When was that training? Last summer, August? I don't even know. During the pandemic. And and I've been part of the leadership team here. So, the notice that went out had to do with one particular study that had hit the news, and I had gotten a kind of a preview from the researchers, and it started there, but within a week, things started accumulating. So I have about 4 different really recent things that I've pulled together. And so it's made this presentation a little bit different from where I started and a little bit messy. And that's okay, because I'm just looking at what's happening right now and just being really curious about what it means for us. The brand of psychology, I guess, that I practice is based in the work of Carl Jung. And this just happened to come up yesterday on the Jung Center website in Washington, DC. And I thought it was pretty timely that when we're faced with the unfamiliar from our ego's perspective, our center of consciousness, the archetypes, as he referred to them, these forces that have a more collective power take over, as in nationalism, as in big movements. These often come up and we sort of lose our individual self in the mass movement. So that's just something I threw in as sort of a backdrop or a background. Data, we'll go to data. Climate Reality Project loves data. So here's a little bit of data. It's a small study. It was an American Psychiatric Association poll of adults here in the US, and just asking about their concerns and anxieties. And these were the stats that they got from that poll. So adults were feeling that they were having more difficulty, or concerns about keeping their family safe for whatever reason. And then more specifically, the impact of politics and the impact of climate change. So I thought this was some nice data to contrast with the study I'll be presenting next, which was of young people. But this was in the US. So people are feeling more anxious and feeling like global warming and climate change are having more of an impact on them. So the study I started off with, which we have a link to the recording, and it's made all of the major papers, I think, is this study that has not been published yet, but the results were presented online. And it is all of these researchers, UK, Finland, and US. And their goal was to understand how echo anxiety, as they called it, affects the emotions and thoughts of young people. Ages 16 to 25 is what they surveyed. In their assessment of their government's response to climate change. So they worked with it's an organization that sends out a lot of petitions and encourages people to take government related action. It's called avaz.org. And it was facilitated and funded by them. So they have a pretty big reach. So they were able to sample 1,000 young people from each of these 10 countries. And they consider Australia to be global north. For, I think, economic reasons. So just briefly, these were their significant findings about the emotions of young people who were surveyed. 67% sad and afraid. More than 50% were anxious, angry, feeling powerless, helpless, and guilty. Over a third were feeling ashamed, despair, hurt, feeling grief and depression, and only less than a third were feeling optimistic or indifferent. And this is hard to see. I had to screenshot this, but this is the blue is the impact on daily functioning. And the countries are Australia, Brazil, Finland, France, India,
Nigeria.
Yeah, Nigeria. Thank you. Nigeria, Philippines, Portugal, UK, and the US. So here we have India and the Philippines and Nigeria, obviously the countries that are already have been experiencing the effects of climate change. And then we can see extremely worried and very worried would be up through the orange. And even the countries that are not experiencing as much direct change in climate effects are still, the youth polled are still feeling this. So their thoughts, 8 out of 10 said that people have failed to take care of the planet. 3/4 think the future is frightening. Over half feel humanity is doomed. They won't have the same opportunities as their parents. Things they value will be destroyed. And there's a threat to the security, economic, physical, and social. And a really powerful piece of the video recording of the findings was of a young activist from Germany who talks about the trauma of even having to think about whether or not to have a family. And that, you know, that it's something that adults haven't had to really think about in this way before in other generations. So the big piece for me as a psychologist and as a psychotherapist was that almost half of these young people said that when they tried to talk about any of this to somebody in their life, they were dismissed, their concerns were minimized, or they were ignored. So people were shutting down or turning away from them or minimizing talking about climate change. So that's sort of my first pause point to ask and be curious about why that is. In the psychoanalytic community, there's a term, disavowal, that is used to say it's not quite denial. It's not happening. It's happening, but it's not happening to me. It's a means of psychologically distancing. In the Jungian framework, we talk about it more in terms of othering, that whatever we can't digest ourselves or accept in our own life or in our own psyche, we kind of put it out there and say, it's over there. And then we can react to something externally, whether it's, railing against it or ignoring it or minimizing it, but it's out there someplace. It's not in here. There's nothing happening in here. So, so when these young people were asked about their government's actions on climate change, they were pretty negative about their government and the adults who are in charge, that they're failing young people, that they're lying, they're dismissing distress about climate change, betraying them and future generations. They did not think their governments were really listening to the science or protecting them or the planet. And they didn't believe their governments were trustworthy or doing enough or taking them seriously. So that's a brief overview of that study. And again, they are waiting for it to be published in the Lancet. And but the recording of the presentation of their findings there's a link to it that we can send out. So this was pretty powerful data. It was a good survey. It was a pretty large sample. And it also acknowledged that only young people who had the technology available to them were able to respond. So it's not, it's selective. It's selective in who is able to participate. But still, they covered a wide area of the globe. And they were surprised that that the percentages were as high as they were. So betrayal was the significant feeling, betrayal. They believed in something and that belief was shattered. And that is that adults are dealing with reality, that adults are handling things in a responsible way, that adults are using information that's out there and available, and that maybe they don't care about children or animals, or what's going to happen when they're gone, when the adults are gone. So their positive feelings were much lower than this sense of betrayal. Although when they did feel that their governments, those who felt their governments were taking action using science and demonstrating a concern for them, they felt more reassurance. I mean, as we would expect, hopefulness and more cared for. So this study was one that was able to establish a link, a probable link between this disruption in their normal activities, these negative thoughts, and linking it to climate change. What do I have here that, oh yeah, okay, so I couldn't, I wanted to transfer some text over. This is the next data point. This was just published as well. It is a summary by Save the Children International. And their child reference group was only 12 children, but they were a little bit younger age group. They went from 12 to 17 instead of 16 to 25. In the report, again, we can send the link out to that. It's a very nice discussion about the inequities, how the global north has caused most of the impacts, or has contributed most to climate change. And the cost of mitigation and adaptation should be absorbed by the global north to pay for the infrastructure that's needed to protect the global south from what is going to be worse for them in the short term. So these I thought were interesting and, disturbing, again, stats. So lifetime exposure to extreme events under the Paris Agreement pledges for children born in 2020 compared to that of a person born in 1960. I was born in 63. So if I think about that, someone born, last year will be 2 times more likely to experience wildfires, 2.8 times more likely to experience crop failures. So food insecurity, and linked with that, droughts, flooding, almost 3 times, and heat waves. And, we know that infants, children, and the elderly are the ones who suffer most from heat waves. The other graph I thought was, okay, why am I stuck? There we go. I'm sorry, again, this was a screenshot, so it's wavery. It's the potential reduction of additional lifetime exposure to extreme events of children born in 2020 by limiting warming to 1.5 degree centigrade instead of higher temperature under the Paris Agreement pledges. So again, these are projections based on the agreements which we're failing to meet. So you can see here, some of them would be substantial if we could meet those agreements, meet the pledges to keep things under 1.5. So again, the children who responded to this study wrote about their own experiences, and they helped to inform the scientists who did the study. They helped to formulate the recommendations. So they collaborated with the scientists on it's about a half a dozen recommendations. But the whole document is really worth reading, I think, because I think it for a brief document and a brief summary, it's pretty well done in really putting the focus on children's rights of participation in future decisions about what's going to happen in their world. So, so this is super wordy, and I don't expect you to read it. This was more notes to myself, but this is and I didn't even have time to research who this academic scientist researcher is, but he's apparently well known in the UK in climate mitigation work. So this paper is coming out later this month, and there was a podcast, again, previewing a little bit of what is in the paper. He is interviewed by this gentleman who has a podcast about climate change and what we're doing to meet it. So he starts off with a tape of the Rio summit in 1992, where this huge room of leaders, world leaders, are acknowledging and making commitments to deal with climate change, because they see that it is the potential for mass destruction is very real. And yet nothing substantial has been achieved, because the numbers back in 1992 are significantly lower than they are now. And his theory of why this is, why nothing much has changed, is the ongoing investment in old narratives by this powerful but small elite enabler expert class. And he said this is corporations, academia, which relies on funding, and thus is really vulnerable to maintaining the status quo, because their jobs depend on the money that comes from wherever it comes from, right? And the failure of imagination to change the narrative, to really imagine the kind of world that we want to live in. So he talks about the need for a politics of humility that resituates human beings in the more than human world, which comes to one of my other hats that I wear, is as a nature and forest therapy guide. When I'm not seeing people in my office, I'm taking people out in groups into the woods and trying to resituate us in our bodies and in the natural world. And a big piece that I would like to explore with all of this is the neuropsych piece, which I don't know if any of you have ever heard of polyvagal theory, but it's really the theory of that fight, flight, freeze, and fawn reaction that we have. It's a trauma response or a response to stress, and it's automatic. It has nothing to do with our cognitive processing, and in fact interrupts our cognitive processing. So if we're offline intellectually and with our executive functioning, we're just in reactive mode and we can't process information. So it's a whole other piece that I'm not bringing in here. Anyway, so I don't know which one of you commented on the fact that, I think it was, is it Amy? We talked about climate being only one part of the ecological crises that are ongoing, and only a symptom of a wider problem that is psychological. It's a psychological problem, and a psychological blockage in being able to see ourselves in that system's perspective, that we're not above it, and the problems we have are not abstractions, they are real, and growth could be reimagined as real things, like growth in female literacy in the global South, in health outcomes, in crime reduction, in river quality, not just monetary, not just imaginary abstractions. And what he talks about later is about the narrative and how these terms get bounced around and they get incorporated in our lexicon and as if they were real. So a lot of the mitigation strategies, he talks about them being like science fiction. They don't exist yet. And even if the science creates these things to draw down CO2 and all of these technological strategies, they're not going to be global. They're not going to be able to function globally. And so we are going to need people on the ground in all of the microclimates who know what is best for their community because they live there. And I commented to Lynn, I think this is where Climate Reality Project is going, to train people all over the world to understand some of these basic concepts so that they can take action in a very local and subscribe, what's the word? It's not subscribed. It's not prescribed. Anyway, in a very local way. And the thing that he talks about as well is that the money is deep in a hierarchical structure, and that within those deep hierarchical structures, we're not going to find results that will meet the goals that we've the commitments, the climate commitments. But it's really hard to step outside of that paradigm. So mitigation and adaptation, he said adaptation, no, he didn't. The previous study said that only 11% of public financing for climate was in adaptation, and that this is really what is going to be needed for resilience. So that is also a really good, it's only 28 minutes long. He kind of is very relatable. And it was a nice thing to watch and listen to. So then here we go. This New Public magazine, New Public is a community that has been researching how would it be to have a healthier web. And we were just talking about this too here. How would it be to have a really community-oriented public space online that's safe and healthy? And they came out with their first publication a few days ago. And this was the study that they launched. And it was this woman, Mary Madden. I can't remember all of her background, but it's been researching teen behavior and teen online behavior. So she interviewed 50 teenagers. And I thought this was really interesting. It came out just about the time when the Facebook hearings were out last week or so. And she made this comment that Facebook only knew that Instagram was potentially harmful to teenage girls because teenage girls told them it was. And it just took me back to that first study of people not listening to teenagers. But when you do listen to teenagers, they tell you exactly what's going on with them. And in this case, Facebook knew it because they had ways, they've been trying to figure out how to engage teens who are leaving Facebook, have left Facebook. So to monetize them, which is what the teenagers could sense. So here is exactly what this last study of this gentleman in the UK, this climate mitigation researcher, was saying. We need a decentralized civic, little pods of civic groups meeting in churches, climate rebellion, or I'm sorry, Extinction Rebellion, teenagers, striking, doing the school strikes, and talking about this, coming up with solutions for their own communities in multiplicities and in diverse ways, because that is how climate change is going to affect the planet, not in some global blanket way that is going to be resolved by one high-tech solution. So, so what this gentleman talks about is this old narrative and how it's maintained in the status quo, and this failure of imagination by people who can't bring themselves to step out what has been supporting their lifestyles. And so I thought it really aligned with her statement here that youthful creativity can be a threat to centralized platforms, many of which depend on generating user bases with enough data coherence to be attractive to advertisers and money. As such, it's inevitable that these companies will double down on lucrative industries like cross-device tracking, data brokers, and internet-connected devices to congeal young people's diverse social lives into reconstituted data packages. I mean, the whole thing just sounds yucky to begin with, right? She really captures it. Like it's a commodification of human life and social activity, and like cheapening it, right, for profit. So this is beautiful to me as a psychologist and a therapist. Members of this younger teenage generation are discovering their senses of selves, and in doing so, collectively laying the cultural groundwork for a more diversified social web, one that may genuinely put more power in people's hands. And I wondered if that was a typo, that she really meant to say, one that may genuinely put power in more people's hands, because I think that's the idea, is a more distributive power structure, non-centralized, non-hierarchical. And that just was beautiful to me. So I will end back with Carl Jung. This is from, I believe, a 1958 BBC interview, and I hope it plays. It's gonna play. It's sort of ominous, but the person who put this up on YouTube said Carl Jung's warning to humanity, and he was right. Uh-oh. There we go.
We are so full of apprehensions, fears, that one doesn't know exactly to what it points. One thing is sure, a great change of our psychological attitude is imminent. That is certain. Why? Because we need more. We need more psychology. We need more understanding of human nature, because the only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger, and we are pitifully unaware of it. We know nothing of man, far too little. His psyche should be studied, because we are the origin of all coming evil.
So it's 8 o'clock. I know. Is our meeting an hour, Lynn?
It can be anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. I wondered if people wanted to discuss to a certain point.
I would love it if people could stay for even just a few minutes and talk about these 4 data points. There's so much more to them. That was sort of a whirlwind through them, but I would love to hear what thoughts, or feelings or ideas came up from these 4 really recent studies.
Well, I will say that I'm familiar with a lot of this.
Mm-hmm.
Our campaign, our Imagine Forward campaign, combines the arts with science to create new narratives and building a media ecosystem that does that, because our long-term mission is fostering or cultivating a societal ethic of obligations to successor generations.
Yeah.
Because what you have now is an irresponsible society that's very, very aligned, if you go back in history, to the Gilded Age, where power is completely out of whack. And the goal was to create a framework to empower people by organizing it in a way that also gives them funding instruments for these local activities.
Mm-hmm.
So that you address all of the areas of need and put together a system that can really help them move forward and connect the dots between the many organizations that have aligned missions, not necessarily only climate change, but their community health, their economic development, their all the range of human beings' needs in the community to rebuild community in a new way in terms of the pathway to sustainability. because sustainability requires a different culture than what you have now.
Yeah.
So, you know, and we're using archetypes. We have the hero's journey as a transition story. All of these narratives that speak to new possibility. Because there's so much negative impact now in terms of the, it's almost like, I don't know, I see it as two wrestlers between the people who want to hold back time and the people who understand you have to meet new challenges. So we're using Thaler and Sunstein's nudge theory of change in the way we've designed, because behavioral science is essential. You can use technology, you can do all of these things, but without human behavioral change, you're not going to get too far.
Yeah.
You know, so I appreciate it. It's a lovely presentation that you put together.
Thank you. Thank you.
Alison?
I have a couple of quick just thoughts. When you talked about the drawdown of carbon, there actually is something now in Norway, Sweden, I don't remember where they actually draw down carbon and instill it into the ground. It's still not in the large scale points, but it's not imaginary anymore. It's actually being done. So that stood out in my mind. And a lot of what stood out in my mind when you were talking is the need for the United States to embark on a total change. And this is where, you know, you're going to have all your drawbacks and your crusty old white men, if you will. And I'm sorry to say that, but they're old crusty old white men that should not be doing what they're doing. I mean, you know, women have been demoralized for forever, and some of these women are extremely intelligent and should be, but my point is that we need to look at the whole, and we need to really refocus and reshuffle the Senate, the Congress, the whole enchilada. I think that we need to work with the SDGs, and we need to embrace the SDGs. I feel like one of the biggest things with children and their fear and anger and hurt and nervousness is because there's not enough education in this country about what's happening and about the truth of what's happening. It's all this fake baloney that there is no such thing as climate change. And we've only been around the earth has only been around for 8,000 years, which is malarkey. So I feel that the lies, and they are truthful when they're saying the people of importance are lying to them. And I feel that that is what needs to be addressed. And until you address the whole, nothing's going to happen. And the United States is going to just keep going. And all these other countries that are the new Green Deal, the blue economy, all of these things that are happening in all of Europe, they're going to take off, and we're going to be sitting here holding the garbage bucket because we're still sitting, 10 years back. We only have 10 years, not even to 2030. You hit that tipping point and there is no return.
And we may hit it sooner.
Exactly.
Yeah. I want to say that there are a few crusty old white women too, but
There are, yes. I shouldn't have been very
But I taught economics for the last 10 years or so of my teaching career. And I want to go back and unteach it all, because we talked about GDP and, and price and all that stuff. And then I taught all the basic things that they expected me to teach. I just have been working on my way through Donut Economics, which, if you have not read it, I recommend it. I think it's an excellent book.
It is.
And we have to rethink everything, our goals, why are we trying to continually grow in consumption? Why is that the focus? We don't know what to do with all the stuff we have now. I mean, that's not where we should be.
I thought that was a really good point that he made about, there's so many, it's not growth that's the problem. It's growth of what?
Mhm.
Like if we had growth of happiness or growth of, people living healthier lives longer, I really, in that sense, when he talks about the these imaginary or fantasy is what he talks about, these fantasy things or the abstractions compared to what's actually real. There are trees, there are animals, there are children, there's water. These are real things that we could measure growth in their health and well-being, and we don't. It's not the priority.
Mm-mm.
I have a question. Why is it, I mean, and maybe this is something I should know, but I come a very, very technical background, not any psychology whatsoever. So when I was in school, we didn't even talk about climate change. So that was quite a while ago. But so is it that the young people are so anxious about it because it's concentrated in education now?
Mm-mm.
No.
It's not concentrated in education, and that's part of the problem.
But so how is it that they're getting there? Is it just off the web that they're hearing about it, or just because they're they spend so much?
I don't think you can avoid it now. It's
Right.
because it's of the effects that are showing up, and it's suddenly all over the news. And I think I sent it to Jennifer. One of the other members here, who is a former student of mine, couldn't make it tonight because she's now a teacher and she coaches, so she wasn't able to come. But she said she's in that 16 to 25 range. She said, just ask me anything. And so I said, tell me how you feel about it. And everything she had to say was right along the same lines. She said, while I am open to having children, I have a lot of friends who say they would never bring a child into this world today, and that we all feel betrayed by the government and the older people, and that they've known for all these years. I worked in a district. Of course, I live in Wyoming County, which is one of the deepest red counties in New York State.
Mhm.
They voted like 74% for Trump, and the school had a science department that taught that global warming was nonsense. Now, I tended to teach, especially once I took over participation in government and economics. I did my best to teach that global warming was real, but it was hard to overcome when the physics and chemistry teacher was saying that there were all these scientists out there that said that global warming was not happening and this was just a cycle and all of the rest of that. And even today, with everything that's going on, I don't know where it is in the New York State curriculum as far as teaching about climate change. It may be required somewhat in earth science.
It is a little bit more now with the new standards coming out, the NISLA standards that are coming out. They're not testing on them, so a lot of people haven't converted. But it's kind of smattered throughout. It gets more and more and more. Like you start at a young age though. So they talk about climate and the difference between climate and global warming. But again, there's a lot of teachers that haven't added it enough of it to the curriculum because it's not testable yet. Because, now COVID happened, and so the testing isn't going to happen for another couple of years. Like I'm big, so I do a lot of, I teach earth science, so I do a lot of, climate change and talk about what's happening in the SID nations, because that in the global south, as I talk a lot about, well, what about these people? It's the North that has created this industrial revolution, and we made everything easy, and we're a throwaway society. And what have we done? We have caused a demise of the ice caps and all these other things. And it's maybe not affecting you in Buffalo, but it's affecting all of those small island nations and all of those coastal cities. So, and I think people need to add it to the curriculum, and it's not forced yet. So that's where there's a lack.
Mhm. Yeah, and Allison, there is a New York State group working on trying to, I only went to one of their meetings because it was not on a night I could go, but the last I heard, they were working towards trying to create a curriculum that climate reality leaders could use to educate teachers about how to teach this.
Right.
So I'd be happy to put you in touch with them if you were.
Yeah, that would be great. I do know that there are teachers even in my school that teach biology and say, well, it's a cycle. I'm like, it is a cycle, but look at the astronomical numbers. So you have to look at the graph it and see it's this huge jump. That's the problem. And people don't see that. I think that education is the key to the adults of the world or of the US, as well as the children, but it's hard to change some, teach old dogs new tricks type deal. It's hard to do that.
This was one of the concerns about even trying to address children's fears. And we were talking about adolescents, but also younger adolescents or children, is there's no parent educator infrastructure to hold this for them, so that, there are these groups that are groups of teenagers going to COP, in November. And, the UK psychologists are all mobilizing to do debriefing because, first, we know how Greta was treated by so many, right? And what she has had to withstand. We know what the Olympic gymnasts have had to go through, not being heard, not being listened to. And when adults tell kids, oh, don't worry, it's going to be all right. And they see things on TV and they know that something is happening. And they hear about, these cute stuffed animals they have, the real thing is going extinct. Like, what can they do with that? And what they're talking about is the polyvagal theory explains why children, their reactions are going to be acting out behaviorally, right? And if the measures of dealing with children who are reacting to climate change are dealt with punitively, what also are we doing? The adults have to understand that part as well, how our nervous systems work, why we go into overwhelm, why we go into disavowal. And if the adults can't deal with it, how are they going to hold this terrifying experience, the terrifying possibility, the reality of it? How are they going to hold that for children and young people? So it really is about that educational piece, not just the facts, but understanding psychology. how do we process things? What makes us go into denial? What is this othering that it's either us or them, and that half the planet is wrong because they mask or don't mask, or vax or don't vax, or Trump or no Trump? Like, how do we ever understand that and teach kids how to be able to hold that kind of tension within themselves in a way that is resilient? So anyway, I'll stop talking because I want to hear what other thoughts people have. I'm just really excited that you're here and that we're having this conversation because it's so important.
Well, I was just thinking, listening to you, that it's interesting how the kids are so open when they do hear this and becoming so passionate about it. And then it's becoming a psychological problem. Whereas I know a lot of adults that are still in denial. And obviously in this country, how many people voted for Donald Trump who blatantly said that there was no such thing as climate change? But the science is very sound in climate change. It's not, it's a theory, which in science is fact. It's very sound science. It's not something that's way out there. So it's just interesting. I think that the kids grasp onto that. And maybe as an adult, there are adults, obviously a lot of adults in denial, but also the kids don't have money involved. There's a lot of money involved with sticking with fossil fuels. And certainly that is, there are ways of capturing carbon that are coming out, but we need to change, not just because of CO2 and methane going into the atmosphere, but also because, fossil fuels aren't sustainable. We need to have sustainable, and we're going to be fighting over them, as we already are fighting over them. So, I mean, we need to switch to something that's sustainable. And so, but there's a lot of money involved in fossil fuels, and there's a few people that control all the utilities in this country, and so that's part of the reason that the people in higher up powers, these crusty old white men that are in Washington, are very connected to all that money. So unfortunately, they pay for their political campaigns. They pay for a lot of things, I'm sure, and so that attitude change is really economically based. And I think if we start pushing for an attitude where we see ourselves, like you were saying, I have never thought about any of this, so this is all fascinating to me. But if we start changing the attitude of people where they can actually envision a different kind of world, there will be umpteen million jobs, and healthier ones, that'll be created. My husband was just reading an article tonight. He was telling me that, there's a fuel shortage going on in Britain, and that it could affect this country, and that it's going to encourage us to start going back to coal, because although coal is very dirty, it's the dirtiest of the fossil fuels, and of course the most emissions, but it's also the hardest to mine and dirtiest and unhealthy. But we have a lot of it, and that's the direction that people are thinking. We'll turn to coal now, and not even in California, where all these wildfires have started, and some of the wildfires have started from sparks from transmission lines. They are looking at more localized power instead of long lines of transmission, and the localized power being the sun and the wind and sustainable power. So, I mean, it's just, I don't know. I just really think that that's the direction we have to go in. But I don't know. This is my little 2 cents on it. That it's funny that the young people don't have as much financial investment in the way we live our lives right now. And some people changes. I remember we had to make some changes at work, and my boss made us all read this book called "Who Moved My Cheese?" And change is so hard for everybody. Change is very difficult for people to accept, and it would be, like you explained psychologically, it's a huge change in attitude for us. To envision a whole different way of life. My husband and I ran this race in Cohocton where the windmills are. And we ran, and there was these signs like "Welcome to Windmill Hell," you know, up there. And I had just walked us to the Greta Thunberg special, the three of them. I had taped them, and I was walking up in these hills with these windmills, and I just was like, oh my God, there is hope, you know, because that special really, those three things that she did were, there was some hopeful message, but it was also kind of depressing for me. And I was just walking up there and I'm like, oh my God, there's hope, you know, these windmills. But, you know, other people that you talk to that live up there, it's, you know, they're like I say, welcome to windmill hell, you know, like they think it's the worst thing since I don't know what, but anyway, so sorry to ramble with this.
I was on a call with Representative Reed's aide and mentioned the windmills in Cohocton, and she said they get a lot of calls from people who say it's going to ruin my view. So, but yeah, and the money aspect is definitely important. I mean, Joe Manchin, right there. You know, all you have to do is say his name. So.
And it's not just fossil fuels. I mean, I mentioned the Olympic gymnasts.
Yeah,
The money and the corruption for what?
right.
You know, these athletes train, and you know, it's supposed to be a celebration of, you know, human potential and dedication and all of those really kind of noble things. And it's again all about advertising and maintaining the status quo, you know.
And exploit.
So and the internet piece too, you know, that kids kind of getting tuned into, I don't want to be a pawn. I want my privacy. I'm going to figure out ways around this money and power grab.
So where do we go from here? Because another thing that was mentioned by my student, and I think was also in the study, is the anger at the feeling, you know, that the kids feel the whole burden of solving this problem is being put on them. Where do we go from there?
That's a good point.
I just think really what it comes down to is education. The Sustainable Development Goals are key. But I think we need to educate the people of the country, and that's what it comes down to. Until they are well educated on the issue, it's going to be this cyclic, constant thing that you go forward one step, go back 3, go forward 2, go back 5. You know, it's just going to be constant.
But it also comes down to, and this is an economics thing, incentives. And our incentives are pretty screwed up. And how do we change the incentives, you know?
There's a lot of green. I only invest in green. The green, what am I trying to say? Stocks and bonds. So I try to stick to the green things, and there's quite a few of them out there now. I mean, they're not like, you know, Amazon or, you know, Google making gazillions of dollars for me, but that's another thing that people need to do is, you know, is it all about making the money, or is it more about investing in the green activities, investing in the SID nations that are going to be underwater and have nowhere to live?
There's actually a lot of work going on at this point that's deeply invested in sustainability. We're not seeing it. It's like green shoots, and they're all over the place. You have a lot of venture funds that are investing in green startups and so on, because we've just charted them out. We spent 5 years building an archive of what's happening across the whole system in terms of where finance is going these days and what's happening in the business community. You have organizations and associations now like Business for Nature, which begins with, you can't do business on a dead planet. And so you have, I would say, maybe 100 major associations that's driving new directions in business. You've got civic groups doing similar things relative to what they want to see with local government, as well as what they're focusing on in the various elections. And you have a lot of stuff that's going on. It's below the consciousness of the broad population of Americans, which is why we're focusing on new narratives and the way that they're being organized. We're actually kicking off with a competition called Step into the Future for Millennials, because they're the leadership generation at the cusp. And they have to step into that role because they're critical to the next 2 decades. And they're now more than 40% of the workforce. So an organization like Drawdown, which was originally fostered by Paul Hawken, who is an eco-business leader, they're focusing on educating workforce for driving business towards climate goals. And we're working with them as part of that, introducing that dialogue. But you have a lot of work going on. It's just that it's below the surface of most people, because most people are getting hit with the news of the day. And the news of the day is not happy.
Right.
So our effort is focusing on creating a media ecosystem that brings that much more forward, so people can actually see that these things are happening and that it's broader than the discussion about disaster and climate change, but the actual positive work on the ground that's taking place and is creative and innovative. They're just not aware of it.
But I think we need to bring that out.
Yes,
it can't, you
that's
know,
the goal.
it can't just stay under the radar. It has to be, we are doing this and we are doing this and throwing it out there. I have a lot of, I have 3 Instagram accounts, and all I do is promote, like I have one that talks about ocean health and what you can do for ocean health and plastic pollution and microfiber pollution. But everybody needs to do that. So instead of inundating, Instagram and Facebook with silly, I'm beautiful, it needs to be,
You need purpose.
it
That's
needs
what we
purpose.
need.
Absolutely.
Civic purpose, because
Yes.
it's a task of civil society, and we're not seeing it that way. And right now you have stakeholders in division and stakeholders in lots of damage. So you need a counter narrative, and you have many voices. It's how, and we're working now on how to design the media ecosystem to connect as many dots as possible so you can raise the level of awareness. Because there is a lot of very real positive effort going on and very creative stuff. Have in the new economic model is called the circular economy. In fashion and food, in construction, in all of these high waste areas, it's a whole new model of production that's taking place. You have a lot of companies in fashion that's doing this and coming up with new ways to deal with fabric. Avery, for example, has just introduced an RFID chip for products, so you can trace the life of the product from birth to death, so to speak. But they're looking at the reusability in a lot of this and how they're designing it so that you have infinitely less waste. So across all of these industries, this is what's going on. in New York, you have a very aggressive climate mobilization legislation that's focusing on mandatory retrofit of buildings. Here in the city, a building of 25,000 square feet, and we have big infrastructure here, has to meet certain criteria by 2030. The Empire State Building had a $30 million penalty if they didn't retrofit, and they did. They did a remarkable job. So there are a lot of incentives that make people move. And so you have a lot of this. You have the 2030 districts now where they're collaborating for retrofitting. So there is a lot of activity. It's just under the surface and people aren't aware. So the goal now is really to collaborate in the design of a media ecosystem where many groups who are stakeholders are part of designing it. And we provide training for how to do it and a format and an identity system for it. So the goal is to bring those voices of people who are doing these things forward into the public awareness.
This has been a really good discussion. We've gone past 8:30 and I don't want to keep you all forever. I had a few little just housekeeping things that I wanted to add here. So if you don't mind, I'll just share my screen briefly. Well, we're going to thank you for coming already. Let's see here. Just a couple of updates here. First off, on our communications, and now I got to go back. I mentioned just when some of you were on earlier that we have Cornell University students who are going to help design our website. They're also going to need to interview a few chapter members as part of their coursework, so we're going to need some volunteers for that. I am working on our first 100% committed win. If you're not familiar with what that is, we ask businesses to commit to 100% renewable electricity by 2030, which is a very easy ask. I just haven't had a chance to get up to it until now, but I'm hoping that our local pharmacy is going to sign on, and that would be a good start. Upcoming events. Sunday rather, we have our next tweet storm. We did this last month, and we are going to try to make climate activism trend on Twitter. If you need some help with the technical aspects, there will be a Zoom from 5 to 6, and at 6:30, there will be a half an hour for just sort of preparation. Tweet storm starts at 7, goes for an hour. We did last time, and we'll do it again, kind of a tweet party where you can get on the Zoom and talk to people while you tweet, and it was really kind of fun. So I will be sending out more information about, with the Zoom links, et cetera. The Finger Lakes chapter, which I'm also a member of and on their leadership committee, we share a lot of things between us. Their next meeting, the topic is plastics, and that will be October 14th at 7 p.m. They're going to discuss the video, The Story of Plastic. We're hoping that people will watch it first, but even if you don't, you can still come and participate in the discussion, et cetera. I'll just send the Zoom link later. And the Finger Lakes also has a book club. The next book is Saving Us by Catherine Hayhoe. That will be October 25th at 7 p.m. And you don't have to have read the book. If you can, that's great. Again, I'll send the Zoom link out. Our next meeting here is Monday, November 1st. We have a couple of possible discussion topics we hadn't really decided completely. We were talking about COP26. Jennifer was talking about maybe discussing climate cafes, which is something that she is very interested in starting. And then Monday, December 6th, there was a little confusion at first. I think Brett Walter thought today was his day to come and talk to us. So he and his colleague showed up, but they're actually coming December 6th. They developed the climate app, the Climate Action Now app. And this is, if you're not familiar with it, it's a great way to do climate activism very quickly and easily on your phone. In 5 minutes, you can have completed 50 actions. It's that quick. You can tweet, you can email, you can call, and it's super exciting. My daughter's chapter, my daughter in South Coast, Massachusetts, had them come and talk to her chapter, and she said it took the entire time and they got a lot of great discussion and learned a whole lot about it. And we can actually put our own actions on there if I ever figure out how. Okay. And that's the end of all of what I had to say. So I do thank you all for coming. This has really been a great discussion. I hate to end it because you all had so much to say, and it was all very valuable. And I want to thank Jennifer for her great presentation too. It was very, very much appreciated. So thank you, and we hope we'll see you again next month for the next meeting. And take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Night, everyone. Thank you for your
night.
input.
All right, thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.